Mommy, the bathroom has water in it. Go quickly!
I try very hard to be in control of her and everything, but it may as well not even be there at all.
I don't like how it feels on my sock.
Just stay there, okay? Just hold on.
How deep is it? Are we gonna die? Is the house gonna fall on top of us? Mommy!
Hey, we just got home, and you would not believe.
Firstly, congratulations on the film. We said that when we met earlier, because you premiered at Berlin and it was originally at Sundance. So I was wondering,
Yes.
since it's been let's say a couple of weeks since, how are you feeling with the film in general, and that's your, I guess, why you looking forward to for this year?
Yeah, I think it's thrilling that it's done so well. I'm not surprised. I'm pleasantly surprised perhaps, but it's been wonderful to see the press receive us well, and then also having Rose win the Silver Bear was a huge accomplishment, I think, for her, of course, and for Mary and all of us involved, because it's clear that that's what made the film so brilliant. We were all just a part of that, but it really is like about this woman's journey, and she did such an incredible job. So I'm excited to see what they do with the marketing and then the theatrical release, I hope. But yeah.
To talk about the film itself, how were you initially drawn to If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, and starting your connection with Mary?
Yeah, I mean, the script itself was what drew me to the project. And Mary, of course, I was familiar with her work. I knew, that she was one of the only, female filmmakers in the mumblecore world. And we came up, when I was in film school, I was, very aware of these New York filmmakers. And so I was super excited to get the script. And, the project is uniquely brave, and also there's like a subversion to how Mary was approaching this character and how we were going to experience the story that I really was drawn to. I liked that there's this theme of like suffering and healing. I am very familiar with like the therapy industry. And so on a personal note, like I felt like this subject matter is very interesting to me. I think we haven't seen motherhood in this way, where we're really, in this singular perspective with a woman that is really unable to see things clearly. So this perception and reality really was great for production design, because that meant that there was a lot of opportunities to explore being expressive and, making choices that were quite brave, especially in this, hole that happens in her ceiling and how that transforms. So it was all, completely, the existential part of it is what drew me to it. And then, of course, Mary being the filmmaker that she is.
So as a production designer, could you give me like a visualization of on a day-to-day basis of what it is like filming on set and even preparing for your like your collaboration with the set decorator and the art director?
Yeah, it's a chaos. No, it's actually a very fun job. It's kind of like a meditation and movement, I would say, because the day-to-day is very there's a lot going on, right? So you need to have things set up for you in a way, and you need to guide that being set up. So nobody's, you're kind of building your team, and then you have kind of your way of working, and every production designer has their own style and ways of working with their teams. For me, You have a schedule. So every day there's creative meetings and every day is a little different. So no day is exactly the same. I would say early on in prep, you're building out your deck, you're getting your keys locked in. So you're bringing in, to assume that you have all of your team with you. You're going from, you're starting your day, you see your schedule, you have creative meetings, you start in the office with your art department, you go over the day's goals, what needs to get done, you liaise with your producers, find out what logistical things are happening that are affecting your work and the budget. And there is this sort of, overall, you sort of have to be able to kind of be spinning a lot of plates. And then you're also not, it's sort of this balance of management and creative work. I find for me that my creative work, like my designing, does not happen until, it happens, a lot of that time is spent before people come into the office, or when I just have a few people joining and we're still getting things set up. I'm using a lot of that time to really get my design concept fleshed out so that when my team lands, I know exactly what I want, and I'm ready for their ideas, and we're ready to start kind of even, sculpting it even more. And then I would say, like, once everybody's in and you're in full swing, you're designing at night or when you're out of those meetings. So I think it's quite common for people, independent filmmakers like me, like we're working, pretty late. I actually like staying late because then I'm allowing myself to kind of get the information and everything that happened that day synthesized and into my deck. And then I can update it and then disseminate more information. And it's this whole cycle every day. So it's pretty interesting. Yeah, I would say there's not any job like it, because then, you're not just in the office, you're going to a stage to look at the build. You might go out shopping with your decorator if you're into that kind of work, the practical work. You're meeting with a special effects person to go over how this is going to work, and that's a part of your design. So there's so many facets, and it's quite fascinating because it's a little bit of location work, architecture, looking at the props team and what are they building, and setting up those show and tells with people. So I could talk about this endlessly because it really is like, it's always giving you something new.
Would you say, as a person who kind of prefer planning everything out beforehand and then going to them one by one, or as things develop, as the film progresses, you kind of figure things out and even improvise as well? Or is there like some kind of like fine line that you tread on?
I think if you're talking about the work, that's a good question, because I could answer it a few different ways. So there's always, so I think like the designing happens pretty early on with the director and DOP and your costume designer, and you have your design, your deck. Everybody kind of comes in with their decks. We all have this vision that Mary has, that she has accepted as this is what we're going to do. And then we're kind of carving that out as we go. But there's a lot of surprises that happen along the way, because as you have you go from concept to the build, or to practical, the result, right? And there's surprises in making that work happen, right? From theory to practical. So I think there is a lot of sorting. It's a lot of figuring it out as you go. So for a project like Legs, there was a lot of there is a lot of discovery that's happening, and I think that's the fun part. On Legs, I didn't have. I got a time with my director and DOP, Chris Messina and Mary, to actually go over these higher concepts about how this hole in this void space was going to work in camera because we didn't use computers. Mary did not want to be leaning on VFX. The interesting part of our film, or I would say the unique part of it, is that we were building this world, like this amorphous, dark world that represents Linda's inner pain and the things that she's hiding. We were kind of, okay, how are we going to approach this? And we were playing with these older theatrical concepts, like late 18th century magicians in Shakespearean theater doing split beam light and, basically reflections and water and orbs, and how do we build these worlds? So that's a great example of how, you know what you want it to look like, but you don't know how you're going to get there. And I think that's true for a lot of the work we do. Like, we have our vision pretty set, but how we get there is where the discovery and this experimentation, like that's a real important aspect to the work. And so I think staying open to your team's ideas and solving problems and using those problems as opportunities, right? Because when you're working with limited resources in the independent film world, how you approach those problems are going to really set the tone for the work, and also the experience with your team. So I think that's what can make you a great designer.
That makes sense. And I was actually thinking that it's a lot of problem solving as well. So when you mentioned earlier about the script being something that draws you and that can determine on your interest, so I wanted to dive a bit into that. When you read up a script, do you initially read it as just a viewer, like a regular audience member, and then as a production designer, and then when you read a script, what exactly are you looking for, particularly to explore these high concepts? And do you keep the budget, or like do you have some kind of, I need it to have some kind of realistic, it has to feel practical, I guess, your design.
Mm. Yeah, so when I read a script, I first read it as an audience member would. I try to visualize it as a viewer. And that's the fun part, because that's when you know if something resonates with you subject matter wise, or protagonist, and character arc and all of these things. And for me, I can be really curious about a story, but perhaps not sure if I have a clear vision. Sometimes it's very clear, and sometimes I think it's a little bit more like curious and exciting. There's because this is before you meet the auteur, the director. And if it's a director that's written it, it's a good chance that they have a very clear vision. If it's a director that's working with the writing, either way, I mean, they're coming with this project that is greenlit and they're ready to make it. So they have an idea of what they want it to look like. When I become informed of how much I'm meant to design something, that happens right after I read it the first time and I start pulling images. And so most designers, if not all, we start pulling images to inform us of how we see the vision clear. You have these floating sort of ideas of things, and then you start getting into the research. And the research is more than images. It's pulling, it's art history. It's doing the research on a place and finding postcards or artifacts or things. And it's a color palette, you start building this world. And that is undoubtedly the most inspired part of, I would say, it's just a very special place because you're working alone. And that's when you're really formulating your ideas and you're building the design concept and the whole, the mise en scène, the whole look, without knowing how they're going to shoot it. But having an idea from, like, for example, Legs, I could see clearly that we were dealing with a singular perspective. It was going to be a very specialized camera work that was very stylized. And that was going to be leading my design. right? So it wasn't necessarily what we were seeing, but it was also what we were not seeing. It was when we are seeing something, is it how it is in reality, or is it how this character is seeing it? And that was this big kind of perception reality balance. And so I basically build out my deck with these ideas, and then and you can also build collages and then get into materiality like you would as a interior designer. You know, it gets very you know, 3D. You can really build out, depends on how tactile you are and how you like to work. If you're a production designer that is more into the architecture, or if there's a lot of world building, like some of these bigger budget films, you know, you can immediately go into art direction and start thinking about, you know, how, especially if it's a place that doesn't exist in real life. So I think it depends on the project. With Legs, it was very much about kind of peeking into Linda's world, and how are we going to be very nuanced with this design, knowing that we were going to build a section of the apartment and then also match it to a location. So there was a lot of like, it was like a lot of sorting out the sense of place and how it makes sense for her, even if it's not how it is in real life. But I think, yeah, I think that's, I don't know if I answered the question, but that's sort of, that's like sort of the creative process with the script. And I think for Mary's script, it's so dense and descriptive. And that was what, I mean, for a production designer to be given that, there's so much emotion and expression in how she writes. So there was so much interpretation that I could use. You don't usually get that much subtext. So, so that was quite exciting because I could really play with how the psychology of how she was putting these moments together. And that's all through color and space and environment and, you know, making those choices. So that happens throughout the whole creative process.
And how did the team come up with the idea of a black hole in the ceiling? And then you obviously develop it as a supernatural force, but it's also a manifestation of Linda's, I guess, nightmares. That's kind of her reality as well.
Yeah. I mean, the whole is, I think it was this manifestation of Linda's psyche. As you said, there was a lot of symbolism in the whole for me as a visual motif. I was using, for me, like on a conceptual level, I felt that the whole was an opportunity to be, you know, this ascension and also descension. So there's this sort of inversion of what the whole is for her. Is it freedom or is it suffering? And I wanted to play with that in how, I mean, and also what I liked about our approach was that we were working with creature artists that work on, you know, prolific work, and they were building things. We did a scaled build of this whole. So we did you know, a scaled down build where there was puppeteers moving this fleshy membrane that was kind of written in, and my art director, Kyra Boselli, she kind of laid out we had this concept art that we showed to our effects teams, and sort of this is kind of how we want it to feel. And then it meant like working with these teams in her scenic team to really kind of create these textures, because we were building it as these sort of plates. So every time the whole transforms, there was a new version of the whole. And that also is like a lot of logistics and, you know, things that are less creative and more, how do you shoot this, you know, and also give us the ability to troubleshoot and flood an apartment on a stage, and things like that. So I think it was always meant to be, for me, it was always meant to be this this opening, right? It's like it begins the journey. It's like the impetus of Linda's self-exploration. That's how I interpreted it. So the water, to me, water symbolizes life. There's so much like metaphorical, it's like an endless well of design inspiration, because you can play with that, with the set decoration, how we chose the artwork for her home. And there was my set decorator, Kylie Corcoran, she had like these spiraling lamps, and everything to me was like about this spiral and this almost like hypnotism, because then she's going into this holotropic breath. And for me, I'm so, I try to be as method as I can with still having a boundary with my work, of course, but I had signed up for holotropic breathing. I've done a lot of meditation. So when I knew that this was the aspect that Linda was going to be experiencing, I wanted to know what that was like so I could understand how that affects the body. And I think things like that really help us, inform us of what the space should feel like. And then of course, who she was as a person before this collapse in the ceiling.
As a craftsman, where you take into account concepts, props, environment, and even the perception of location, history itself, how do you visualize all these kind of elements that you're meant to juggle in your mind and then applying it into practice while trying to, I guess, l- kind of juggle with the reality that you have to also abide by this kind of accuracy, that there's this kind of standard where you have to, I guess, match a certain kind of culture or history while trying to keep it your own kind of creative thought.
Mm. Yeah, I think we're always making choices as a production designer. We're always the research is really important, and I think you have to know, architecturally speaking, like where we are in the world, what kind of place it is, what kind of people inhabit the place, and that is the foundation of the canvas, right? That's like that those are the fundamentals, like that informs you of your palette. And then it's the perspective of our script. So then we get into characterizations. And for me, the characterizations, the feeling of the characters, the psychology, the trauma, the experiences, everything that they've been through, is how we start to kind of color them. And I think, so I think palette is really important. I also think, in terms of period, when we look at places, like if we're in a film that's a period film, if it's in the 70s, let's say it's the early 70s, then we're going to be bringing in, we know we need a lot of late 60s or early 60s things, because when we're in the world, we're not just living in that time frame of where we are at that moment, right? So there's always this story of objects and this story of the history of, these very anthropological kind of details. And I think those are, so that goes into it. And I think there's always you need to totally respect that, unless there's something in the story that wants you to, that's taking us out of that on purpose. And that has to be, you have to be self-aware if that's what you're doing. In the regards to like the props and the pieces that we're working with, we create from my deck, we create boards that are like my prop master, like Bridget Rafferty on this one, she created boards that were very detailed, and they were and I would kind of look at things. We would talk about our favorites, and then her and Mary would have their creative meetings, and she was very hands-on with building little creatures and details with how we were going to create this look of child without seeing her daughter. So those props with child were really important. And then, of course, her feeding machine, which was something that we custom made based on Mary's, knowledge of that machine. And then we also decided that we wanted to create a stylization of that. So we 3D printed. So we had the actual machine that was functioning, but then we created lights, and we put we basically augmented, a completely new design on this base structure that wasn't a feeding machine at all. It was, an EKG or something. So we had, these very, you're basically blending reality with fantasy. And that's how I think, that's also how we approached locations as well. So, yeah.
As in, so obviously the child has the hole itself, and just like there's a hole in the ceiling, so there's that kind of
Yes.
similarity. But there's
Yeah.
also the feeling that because the hole is in the ceiling is like a manifestation of Linda's psyche, that could also be translated to the daughter as well. So I was
Yes.
wondering, like, because as a designer, you're trying to create this blend of reality mixed with fantasy, and it could be all parts of Linda's world. So,
Yes.
like, could you talk me through that process, I guess?
I think that's what Mary really wanted to, I mean, that's what we were playing with, exploring, was the sort of mimicry with what was happening in her most intimate space in her home, right? That's her bedroom. And you could look at it on like a psychological level that, she's pushed out of her safest space by this flood, which is the beginning of life, right? This like water is this, for me, it's, then we end up in the ocean, right? It's this whole, like, to me, there's like this very cyclical kind of expression there. So she's pushed out of her safe space. And then she's, taking her daughter to this other place that is very otherworldly, or at least feels like it's meant to make her feel like she doesn't belong, or it's sort of, again, she's not seeing that hotel room. That machine is all you see. And you're right, we don't see what's happening with child. We see that there's some milky substance. Again, there's a very like maternal, feeding. Linda's eating a lot. There's all of this like nourishment kind of subtext with like what we're doing in literally in the story, and then also, how we're making these liquid nutrient cans. We design them very like governmental, and they're meant to be very not like depersonalized. There's all these like very systemic things that are happening that are kind of forcing this tension. And then when we see that there is this expressive, action that she's doing, when we see that she's decided to finally look at her daughter and pull out, this tube, I think that is, that's meant to be her sort of facing herself, I think, seeing her daughter for the first time. There's a lot of these moments where I think we're just, again, like inverting these two realities. And I want to keep it open, because the way that we've talked about these things are meant to be explorations for our audience. So I don't want to say like if it was real or not. Of course, you come back to it. And I think there is a little bit of comedy there, because after her suffering with this hole and it never getting done, and her bringing Jamie, who's played by A$AP Rocky there, and he's injured from it. And there's this, very sinister kind of these moments with this hole where it's almost like mocking her. And she's really, facing it head on, and going through this whole like existential crisis, journey, facing herself, coming back, trying to manage her daughter's illness. And then in the end, you have her husband, and it's fixed, and here, and look, it's so easy. And I think that's more Mary playing with this sort of, this very feminine experience, this very, what could be an experience of motherhood with the way that we engage with systems in society and the way do people believe us. And, I'm not saying that she's trying to make any political statement but I do think there is some fun like aspects to it where it's meant to feel like you're meant to feel a little bit like with Linda on this, like you're meant to feel that she's really been fighting the good fight alone. And then you have, how the people how her husband and her are together and in the end, and how you see that dynamic unfold. I just don't think we've seen anything exactly like it. So I think it's a really important experience because we're with Linda. We're not between the two of them. We're actually with her. So I think nothing is really meant to be, oh, this is what it really is. I think the whole experience is about, this is her experience and what is reality? Is it perception? Is it what decides that? And I think those questions were really allowing us to be very creative and curious and make decisions that were going to push the audience to feel something. And that's, to me, it's like, it's meant to be, my work with the story was meant to be a provocation of what some of these themes that Mary is exploring.
And there's a clear emphasis in using these 70s styled motels. There's that singular corner shop and then the nearby beach. And how did you go about using these close by locations to develop the world for Mary to express Linda's imprisoning and suffocating perception of reality?
Yeah. The hotel that we found was in Montauk. And so we had decided that was going to be sort of the town that they lived in. Her husband is working as a captain of a ship. And that backstory, which is just only something that we talk about and that, we really don't speak to it, is that Linda is in a place that is more about her husband's world. And so this motel that we found was meant to be sort of near her home. That's why she's able to walk back, run back and forth. And when we found it, it was the photos it was still kind of vintage and it had some nice elements. But by the time we had actually landed the location and scouted it properly, we realized that they had completely renovated the place. So it was very white walls, white linens, everything was not as it is in the film. So, and I knew that our concept, our vision for this hotel and our deck and what we talked about was meant to be this sort of hideaway beachy motel that's a little dated, that's a mix of eras. It wasn't meant to be so period, but it was like this sort of blend of a forgotten place. And we wanted it to feel that way so that we could really feel this impact of her being stuck in this place. And so my art director and my decorator, Kylie and Kyra, we had our plan to completely redesign it. And so we put up wallpaper. And the interesting thing about when you're looking at vintage wallpaper, you see that, that 1940s actually looks a little bit 80s and, 30s looks a little, you have these eras that repeat themselves in the, interior design when you're looking at how things, so we had 1940s wallpaper, but it actually was meant to look, more 70s, 80s. And we had linens that we found, so everything that was kind of, we were gathering was meant to kind of give us a bit of a narrative that was mixed, but in terms of like story and time. But we laid out carpet, we changed fixtures, we covered new air conditioners that we couldn't remove with like old vents. And so it was a complete reconstruction of a place. We changed, umbrellas and signage and graphics, and my art department team was incredible because they had graphic designed, even the phone information, that gets die cut and put on the number keys. We had key cards made. We changed outdoors. I mean, it was a complete, new world when we were done with it. And that was meant to it was meant to feel a little bit for me like I wanted it to sort of mock Linda a little bit because it has this like very happy kind of, it's a little bit like a little campy, but yeah. So, a wave in, it was kind of exactly, what we wanted to be. And of course we don't really see much of that room until the end. So it's funny when you really create an environment and then you have one moment to see it. I think that's also a choice too, that is quite strong because, and I think that's what we're doing. We're taking so many risks with this, and that's what makes it so thrilling. But yeah, it was that motel was a big, a lot of work. And of course, Aesop Rocky's room was meant to be strange as well. The note that I got from Mary was that, we knew kind of what we had decided of what he did at the hotel, and that he was this sort of mystic character, and everything with his storyline in terms of props and set decoration was meant to feel like he's this Renaissance man, I felt, and that he really is fixing things at the hotel and he's really taking care of it. He's sort of like behind the curtain, taking care of people, and he's kind of making sure everything's okay. He's sort of the balance in the reception area when, Ivy is coming for Linda. And I think that, Rocky's character is, he's such a sweetheart, like in real life. So his character is like, it feels that he's just this, he's really almost like making sure she's okay, even if he's like sort of mocking her a bit. I don't think and so we only see that. We only see that he's kind of probing her at times because that's what she feels. But in a way, I think he's really holding space and not really sure what she needs, So, yeah.
Sorry, that just reminded me of Wicked. But so one thing I was wondering is, as a production designer, where your film is centered on this leading role where the character is her own frame of mind is kind of isolated and distant from everyone else, but she's also suffocating within that world. How do you even try to begin to think about the visual style for that kind of mental frame and then uh, translating it onto screen with Rose herself?
I think my part of that would be, I analyze what is happening in the scene from an emotional standpoint and a psychological standpoint, and I make decisions, fundamental design choices that help like furnish that energy. So support that energy. So if I know that in Linda's case, she's a therapist, and there's this reveal that we start with her in therapy, and then we move down the hall and we realize, oh, she's also a therapist. And I love this, again, this inversion, playing with reality a bit. And in her office and in the hallway at large, she's very constricted. I find that she was, I felt that this is how we were going to play her. So I wanted everything to be really devoid of color, and I wanted it to feel a little bit surreal in a sense that like the paintings were the same colors as the walls, and everything felt like very sterilized and and not felt. And then we have these sound machines, which I thought they did a beautiful job of creating this ambiance to this heightened, this kind of forced Zen, sound. And then when we get into her therapist's office, it's very rich. We have these like tapestry, these like the sort of arts and crafts kind of vibe with the furniture. There's, textiles, and it feels cozy, but it's also very strong with this color, this more saturated, cool tones. And that's where she's really like herself. There's this like all this emotion in those conversations, even if her therapist, played by Conan O'Brien, isn't giving her what she wants. She is really bearing her soul. And those scenes were so powerful to watch because there was improv and there were things that she really went to these like very intimate places with herself. And so that environment I knew wanted to feel, we wanted to feel her. And so I think that's how I make those decisions. And it was the same with the bedroom. I used, the color story in there was very, red violet. It was meant to be electric. And, there's this like sort of ultra violence, and there's this like real, to me, it was like the womb of the space, this hole is like, again, this birth and death and everything that she's facing within herself. So I knew the bedroom wanted to be more expressive in that sense.
And we've obviously talked about the look of the film, but I feel like when you're designing the world, you're also taking into account sound, diegetic, non-diegetic, and even trying to create the atmosphere that can really create that authentic, I guess, feeling of Linda's struggles. So from that perspective of looking into sound, even if you're not like a sound designer personally, like how do you even think about like collaborating with the sound team and then trying to figure out the right balance for your kind of vision of how it should look?
Actually, I think it might be different depending on the project, but so sound for me it's very specific the way it informs my design. Because I don't work with sound designers like maybe the DOP and director would in post. And of course, that is such a huge aspect to how we feel a story. But what I like and what Mary also does, and we really connected on this because I think usually I'm asking my directors like, hey, I'm going to make a playlist for our move. I like making like a playlist for the film I'm working on to kind of encourage the atmosphere of the creativity. And I think she had already had one. And these are, bands that I was listening to when I was younger that I know she was also listening to, Guided by Voices and the Ramones, and, some more punk and then also some, very kind of country, more Americana songs because the Linda and Child are singing that beautiful song in the film, and that's their special thing. So I think music is how I approach the work because that's something that's contained that I can use for inspiration. But when it comes to like making those decisions about how they're going to amplify the way something feels, we were looking at films together, and that's in the creative aspect of our process, or like in the early stages of our creative process, but they're just making those decisions without me. So I love the choices they made, and I thought the sound design was incredible. I mean, I really was very impressed with that aspect. So I think it's a great question. I just can't speak to it because I had very little knowledge of how they were going to play it. but music is such a driver for Mary and her storytelling. So that was an awesome part that she felt just as passionate about. So
And as usually when we ask questions about the films and speaking with the director, we mention what influences they drew from other films to make the film. But as a designer, what kind of worlds did you draw from, or kind of these close-up settings to really give you that kind of inspiration to draw from
Mm.
and develop your own vision?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, we had so there's some fine artists that Mary and I both were discussing early on. And you know, for me, some of my influences were like from my earlier days as an artist, which is interesting because that's, I think, why this film felt so like personal to me, because Mary and I have some overlapping tastes, which is wonderful because sometimes it doesn't need to be that way. You know, to be inspired to design a story, you can really learn a lot about your director's influences, and they could be new to you. But we had, you know, a lot of fine artists that were more feministic, that were subverting beauty from the 60s, 70s. To me, these were like a lot of New York artists. I was looking at like Ava Hess and Carolee Schneemann and Francesca Woodman. And then there was also some films that were, we all went as a film crew, or at least I went with my art team. But they were playing Possession, you know, on 35, on a print of 35 at the Metrograph, or, you know, in Manhattan, and we all went. We were looking at a lot of like Eastern European cinema. I was referencing some, you know, so some older work, and then some like French like dance films that we were looking at for The Void, for The Hole, or actually a French Canadian. I think it was Norman MacLean, and that was our DOP's reference. And then we also had like creature films. You know, for me, it was also like looking at Lynch, or I love Eraserhead. You know, to me, this was like my kind of female, you know, Eraserhead that's how I kind of felt about it. And then we were looking at Nightmare on Elm Street, and like how, because a lot of those films, they're really working with practical solutions, and that's how we were approaching it. So everything we were doing was quite physical. And of course, Possession, I mean, there's this whole, you know, unfolding of this woman's madness, and it's a brilliant film. But that was, I think, like one of our favorite references. But of course, you look at those and then you go back, and then you kind of want to forget about them, because then you don't want to then you're not doing that, you know, you're doing something different. But there's an energy, or there's like a feeling to those pieces of work. And once you kind of capture that and witness it, then you can go back and say, okay, we're going to do this. This is how we're going to approach it. And you still have that sort of unconscious inspiration, but it's not like something that you're looking at all the time.
And this is kind of a fun question, I guess. Linda, Linda in the film, what animal do you think could represent her psyche?
Oh, what animal could represent Linda's psyche? Okay. That's an interesting question. I think she could be, not a hamster. I think it could be, I almost feel like, and only because it's been coming up as a synchronicity for me lately, but I was going to say a raven. But I think, yeah, I think maybe a bird of some sort, because I think there's a real like freedom to what she's you know, what she's journeying towards. And I think it's quite mental. I think it's in herself. Like I think it's in her,
Mm.
you know, in the way that she this surrender at the end. Um so she, and I would say like, not to be literal, but the ocean wouldn't have her. So I think like
Mm.
her getting thrown from the ocean and really surrendering to herself and her child, and this like awareness, like very quiet wisdom and awareness that she has. I think it's quite like on its own. You know, I think she's meant to have like a very singular like sort of experience. So yeah, I don't know if that fits,
I mean,
but
could be. I mean, I was thinking lone wolf, but that's just
it's
a
like,
random thrown idea. Going forward, is there anything you could share on what you're working next, or have you not decided yet?
no, actually things are a little quiet right now, but I just moved to Europe. I'm living in Stockholm, and I know you're in London.
Yeah.
Um, And so I'm looking at some projects here, but I haven't decided yet, so I can't speak to them. But I think that this is a little bit of the end of a lull, and I think we're going to start getting. I have read some exciting scripts, but nothing has been greenlit yet. So we're sort of in limbo, which is a nice time to. I like to use this time to kind of go back to the drawing board on my craft and how I can strengthen some of my skills. So this is actually a nice time to just do some research
Mm.
and some work on the computer, which is gonna, you know, always make the next projects better. So yeah.
Mm. Actually, that mean I was wondering, are you more of a computer person or just a hands-on person with your designing?
Actually, I've been quite hands-on. I have a background in fine art, and I have and also before I was designing, I was a decorator.
Mm.
Um and I was also on set. So I really like being in the marketplace. I really like being with people. And I really like the tactile nature of designing. So I like
Mm.
drawing, I like model making, I like painting. But that's kind of why I'm using this time to go back to the computer, because I think it's something that is really important for the craft, especially with where we're going with technology. So um, you know, I'm in the Art Directors Guild, and they offer a lot of classes. And so I'm working on my model, my, you know, renders, and sort of going back to that part of
Mm.
my education, which is uh, really cool because there's so much to play with. And so
Mm.
that's sort of where I'm at right now.
Mm.
Um, gonna take like a ceramics class, and that'll
Mm.
be like, you know, the old stuff with the new stuff. So I really enjoyed this conversation. It was good to think about things again because it's been a few
Mm.
weeks. So I
Mm.
appreciate your time and your interest in our movie.
I mean, it's actually I think it was my first time speaking with production designer, so it was a
I thought
very,
so. I thought so.
so it's very new to me. So, but I enjoyed it, and I mean, usually for films, I feel like the world, not just the world itself, but creating that distinctive look just for the specific character in mind is so key that it can easily go wrong and lose your immersion entirely. But yeah, that's for me, I guess.
Well, I appreciate that because I will say that like not many people know what we do. And I
Mm.
understand like your allure with above the line, and I get it. I think it's great. And I
Mm.
mean, the actors, they're the ones connecting with the audience. And I love acting actually.
Mm.
But um I appreciate it because I think that like it's fun to talk about the process. And usually when people like the way something looks, they only talk about the camera
Mm.
work. So I
Yeah, exactly.
appreciate, yeah, so I appreciate you using the opportunity to just talk about a movie that you liked, and you
Mm.
know, expanding you know, your horizon a bit. I think it's exciting. So thank
I
you.
mean, I think that would actually explain my preference, speaking with actors is because I'm getting into full-time acting myself.
Oh,
And
cool.
so So I have that initial curiosity to want to know from the inside and try to, like you want to take pieces
Yeah,
from everyone and then impart into your own
apply it.
experience.
Yes,
So
I
yeah,
actually, I was working with an acting coach. I'm actually in a film coming out. Acting is
okay.
it's my secret passion. And so as a
Mm.
filmmaker, yeah, directing and acting, but I think acting is I have a film that's we're submitting to festivals. And so I'll let you know if that goes anywhere. But
Sure.
it's I think it's the most thrilling work you can do aside from
Mm.
being behind the camera. It's like I would say it's I have such a respect for it now that I've actually done it.
Mm.
And it's so good luck to you. And I think that you have such a nice energy, and the way you connect with actors, I've
Appreciate
seen it's really sweet. And you can tell you really like care about what you're watching, and you really want to ask the tough questions. And I think that's great for a journalist who's also,
it.
getting the exposure to do your creative work. So good for you.
Mm.